Welcome to the Under Construction Podcast. My name is Ryan Mann. This to my left is Jane Durango and Martin Eisbrenner. We are all fourth year carpentry instructors, and we are currently working on a project to basically decide or figure out whether or not podcasting can actually be a good resource for our students as a sort of a supplemental, to the education that we give them. So we're going to be going through a number of topics that are related to the fourth year curriculum. And so today's topic, what we're going to be talking about is safety. We always start every single intake of students off with safety. And so no safety lesson in class would start without some horror stories.
Yeah.
Right? So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to tell one, somebody else is going to tell one, and we'll kind of go around until we've
Sounds good.
exhausted everything.
No.
I know.
Okay.
But mine, I should back up. I'm sorry. I believe that every single accident could be prevented. That's my take on things. Whether or not that's accurate, maybe not. We can argue about that if you like. But when you're giving your story, just think about how it could have been prevented, because I think it probably could have. So mine, I was putting in a coffered ceiling in this beautiful, beautiful house. My truck was down in the driveway, which through the house was a big, long walk. And so it got to the point where we were starting to put everything together, and I didn't have my spiker. It was downstairs in my truck. And so I didn't want to go get it like a chump. And so I saw that my journey person had his spiker there. Mm-hmm. And here's where I think it could have gone better. Okay. If I would have gotten mine, which I was confident wouldn't double fire, no accidents would happen from that, I'd have been in much better shape. But I was going along, putting in all these pieces, keeping in mind, distances from nozzle, all that kind of stuff, thinking I'm doing this good. Doing it well, I guess that's better English. And all of a sudden, chunk, chunk, and the second one went straight into my hand. First one went in the right spot. Second one pierced my hand right through the fleshy part between your forefinger and your thumb. And so, wasn't necessarily the end of the world. I kept working for the rest of the day after I pulled it out. And it was a little tender. But I had just gotten my tetanus shot a week before because of a similarly stupid thing that I did. And I was pretty confident I was good as far as tetanus went. So it could have been prevented had I gotten mine instead of using my journey person's, which I found out later did have a tendency to double fire. Didn't know, was unfamiliar, and therefore an accident happened.
Maybe he should have told you.
You'd think.
Could you imagine that in a slightly different scenario? Like, let's say my circular saw had this bug where the guard doesn't go back and cover the blade, but you don't tell anybody. But yeah, you go ahead, use it. Not a good outcome.
No. Do you guys have a good story? Bad story, I guess it would be.
Jane's looking at me, so I guess it's my turn.
All right.
When I was an apprentice, I was a finisher. Was a residential finisher, and this one day, the boss's brother, who usually did baseboards, was not able to do it. So unfortunately, we had to go do baseboards, which I still hate to this day. There's no joy in crawling around on your knees, that's for sure.
No.
Anyway, we're doing, as all the carpenters out there will know, 356 oak baseboard.
Oh.
Anyway,
that's worth an accident just to not do that.
Yeah. Just to get out of it for sure. So, and he had the old beater miter saw that we didn't normally use. It was a 10-inch Rockwell, maybe an 8-inch, I don't remember. But anyway, there was no guard on the blade.
Of course.
Disabled or gone or who knows what.
Yeah. It was just in the way.
Yeah. And that sounds bad, but the guard wasn't the issue. The fact was I got a small bit of dust or whatever in my eye, sawdust, and it scratched the eyeball. And so I was like, man, it's just driving me crazy. And it wouldn't stop. So I headed off to my doctor, who was in the neighborhood, just 4 or 5 blocks away. And he's looking around, and he's flushing and looking. He's like, hey, there's nothing left in there anymore. But it still felt like there was something in there. Gives me a few drops, Of course, it freezes the surface of the eye, and then everything's cool. All the pain goes away.
Right.
But it was in that moment where I was like, wow, that could have been so much worse. And had it been something bigger, like a bigger chunk, or could have been, I don't know, a piece of concrete if I was using a chipper or whatever
Right.
sort of thing, that could go. And that was really one of the triggers for me where I really started to pay attention to safety, because that was residential. And we know that residential can be a little bit on the wild and crazy side. So,
Yep.
yeah. So it was a trigger for me.
Hmm.
I'm a lot better now.
That's interesting how sometimes it does take a trigger like that. I had a similar one where I was using a pry bar over top of my head. The hook is pointing right at me. I wasn't wearing safety glasses, and whatever I was prying let go, and it hit me just right above the eye, and I was gushing blood.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine. From that point on, I was a safety glasses kind of person.
You're after that. You're one of those guys on the job site.
Yeah. Everybody, make sure you're wearing your safety
Yeah,
glasses.
that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think near misses are what really inform how we can get better at it. And
I think
that's
you're right.
probably why you think many accidents could be prevented, is because of the near misses you've had or people working with you have had.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to say I've had only near misses. I've had a lot of near misses, but I've never had a permanent thing happen. But my story I was going to share was about a ladder.
Okay.
And it was on a frosty morning on a second-story deck. And I got to work that day, and I could hear my helper up on the roof. But I looked at the ladder, and I had a feeling I should put a block there, like a cleat behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought, I had just cleaned the deck. There was nothing handy. He's up there. Should be good. So just as I was transferring my weight to the roof, from the ladder to the roof,
Mm-hmm.
the ladder went,
Oh no.
and I had to ride the ladder down, and I had to decide how it was going to end for me. And luckily, it was in such slow motion, I made a good decision, and I got away with it.
I was gonna ask, did like time slow down and
It's
suddenly
like,
you're having like a Matrix moment?
But also your cat-like reflexes.
Yes.
Yes, well, sure.
Yeah.
But then how could it have gone worse? I could have had a messy job site,
Right.
and this story would have ended very differently.
Hmm.
So even the messy job site can be a safety issue.
Housekeeping's a big part of safety for sure.
I guess I should have pointed out I wasn't wearing safety glasses in my case.
I think we
It
figured
makes a
that part out.
difference.
Yeah.
Well, you never know. Because, I mean,
Yeah.
I've had that happen too, where I've had safety glasses on and still managed to get something in my eye.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
But certainly wearing them is a massive improvement.
Yeah. Definitely cuts down on the number of
Yeah.
accidents you might have. And then, there's always the safety squint, right?
Oh, yeah.
One thing that really changed the way that I think about safety was something that you said, Jane, about a year or two ago, when you were talking about focus and how we can't focus all the time, so we get to pick when we focus. And so I'd love it if you could sort of share your thoughts on that with everyone, because it was such a good point that you made.
Wow, now after that build
Yeah.
up, how am I going to do
Pressure's
it?
on.
Live up to it.
Well, I have always had apprentices working with me. And I maybe was noticing this before school, but it's since I came to school where I could really feel when people can focus on the task at hand, or whether they're focused on something bigger or something else.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was talking to you that time, I was thinking about, when do we really need to be focused? We need to be really focused when we're doing something dangerous.
Yeah.
We don't really need to be super focused when we're sanding, but I feel like giving yourself room to relax and then focus and relax and then focus gets you trained to focus in on what could possibly happen here. That could hurt me,
Yeah.
maybe. It could even be about that cut, but making a good cut and being safe making a good cut kind of go together too.
Mhm. I like that. Yeah. And the thing that really sort of hits home for me personally is that it's like, of course you can't focus all the time, right? None of us can. so that means choosing when we focus becomes all that more important and kind of empowering that we get to choose that, right? So, yeah, I really, really, really like that. What do you think, Martin?
I wasn't paying attention.
So I have a story
Speaking
from
of
Martin.
focusing.
I have a story from Martin on that. He
Oh.
was talking about focusing on the cut at hand and not the project in total, right? If you're focused on the cut, not the desk, you're going to have a better end result and a safer end result. So if I'm behind a saw, I focus. That's also going to make me cut what I want.
Yeah.
Because I'll realize what I'm doing. And then if I can't, maybe I shouldn't cut right now. If I can't focus behind the saw, maybe I should go and sand something.
I feel like it's true that in fourth year we don't get as many accidents. I think all the accidents occur in the early stages of training just because it's new and there's various reasons for that. But in fourth year, the students have a different sort of pressure and tension just because there's an increased level of complexity. The desk project is very complicated. So they have a tendency to have tunnel vision, and they're looking just to finishing the desk and not each specific procedure.
Right.
Yeah. So.
No, it makes perfect sense. You've got time constraints, you've got complexity, everything kind of, and so you get like tunnel vision on this big project versus each of the little pieces that you need to focus in on. So that's a great way to put that. Good. Kind of shifting gears to, we've got commercial carpentry in our world, and we've got residential carpentry. So what does safety look like within those spaces? And, if you stand back and you go, okay, well, all of these big commercial companies have safety programs and everything sort of in place for, every little piece and policy and procedure. And then you've got residential, which almost feels like the wild, wild west, right? I think you alluded to that earlier. And so where it doesn't seem like there's any safety programs, these smaller companies are existing. And so, I'll be the first to admit, I was a residential renovator, and we spent very little time talking and acting out any sort of safety policy, procedure, or anything. And so, I never wore safety boots. I always wore Chucks, right? Well, they're good for the floor, right?
We come up with these things.
Yeah, right in my head.
That's right.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on commercial, residential, how they work?
I don't think there's, in residential, I don't think there's like a willful sort of disobedience. I don't think anybody's telling you to not wear safety glasses or don't wear those safety boots. It's more like there's a lack of discussion about them.
Okay.
Or, just saying, hey, it's a good idea to do the following things. So there's, I think, a lack of that. Jane, what do you think?
Well, I spent a little bit of time on a commercial job, and we had safety meetings, and we had safety people and even safety supervisors going around. But I feel like there was not too much respect for the safety supervisors. So I'm going to turn it on its head from our discussion here, and I'll say they talk about safety on commercial jobs, but with the staff, the culture isn't that much safer. Yes, they have to wear gloves maybe and glasses, but that doesn't mean they're acting safely. And they do get caught by their safety supervisors. They all have stories about it. And my experience at residential, of course, is quite a bit different from 20 years ago when there was no one wearing safety glasses. But I feel like on a modern residential site, they care about who they're working with, and so they have informal safety. It's like, hey, I don't want you to go home hurt. I don't want to tell your wife or your partner we did something stupid.
Do your work.
And I don't want blood in my truck.
Right? Exactly.
It's really in the best interest of the employer so that they don't lose downtime.
Yeah.
And I mean that's what it all comes down to is productivity and
Right.
that's so it's in everybody's interest.
It is, especially the person who's not getting hurt.
Yeah.
It's in their best interest.
Sure.
Mhm. And you know, my observations in shop class, my observation in industry is that paperwork doesn't necessarily equal safety, right?
No.
Most accidents that I've seen that are sort of outside of the I wasn't wearing PPE category, it goes all back to I lost track of what I was doing for a moment. And I either made a terrible decision for a moment or I lost focus for a moment. And that's when accidents tend to happen. And so, yeah, I mean, I think talking about safety is great and all that kind of stuff, but I don't think JHAs save fingers necessarily. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I think it is a little bit about not wanting to lose time, which means wages, or becoming disabled. A near miss will smarten you all up.
Real quick.
Each one of our stories was a I'm not doing that again kind
Yeah.
of story. And if you're lucky to have that kind of a moment, you need to listen to that kind of a moment.
I wanted to comment also, I just thought of this. The Alberta Occupational Health and Safety Act, when they go about doing an investigation after a fatality, which you can see on their website, they will assign blame to the various parties that are part of that incident. And one of the things that is talked about is something called due diligence. Did you actually do what you could have done? And they will assign blame partly based upon that.
Interesting. So it's not just the employer's responsibility. It is very much also the employee's responsibility.
That's right.
Because they're going to put blame where blame should be placed.
Could be the owner of the property. It could be the general contractor,
Yeah.
a specific subcontractor, and yes, even the person who was injured.
Interesting. I really like that. So actually, that ties in perfectly with what we're going to chat about next, which is this whole idea of, the OH&S Act giving employees the right to refuse unsafe work, responsibility even. And so, on paper, it says, if you feel like you're being asked to do something that's unsafe, you can refuse it. So, in my head, I immediately go, what are the repercussions of refusing that work? And so there could be fallout with your employer, right? Even though they're not supposed to retaliate in any way, shape, or form. There could be fallout with your fellow coworkers as well. And so what are your thoughts? Where do you land on this whole refusing unsafe work?
I think one of the big questions for me is, how do you know what's unsafe? There's always the act, or the code, the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And so that you know what is wrong, because there's a bunch of numbers in there and you shouldn't do this and that, and that's great. But also you should have informal training on the job site about how to proceed in any activity. And there's also something called intuition, which is when your spidey senses are tingling and you're like, something's just not quite right here. And you could stop and ask or evaluate. And so there's the idea of that, knowing what's wrong, first of all.
Yeah.
Sure. And maybe you guys don't like hearing this, but sometimes you're asked to do something that scares you. Height is a big one.
Yeah.
We can't control how we feel at heights. And sometimes it takes some getting used to. But if you feel scared, you should, and it is your responsibility to tell somebody that I am not comfortable doing this. Maybe I need another once over, or can we talk about what's going on here so that I can feel better about the job you've asked me to do.
It's fair.
You just reminded me of a trip I took to Toronto once to visit my brother. We went up the CN Tower, and we got up there, and he couldn't take his hand off the inside wall. I'm out there by the windows looking around and, walking all over the glass floor, and he's got to keep his hand on the inside wall. Yeah.
It's really, really funny you mentioned that. I have a fear of heights. It comes from watching a guy fall off a roof and die. But we went to the Calgary Tower. I think it was like 3 years ago, 2 years ago or something like that, my wife and kids. And so, my whole rest of my family is like standing on that big, thick glass that you can look down to your death. And, and I'm like they're like, come on in. I'm like, I'm trying not to
Yeah.
pass my fear of heights along, but I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm holding on
Yeah.
and trying to go in. So, whoo,
And you have no control over that.
no.
Yeah, for me, I'll just do a quick one here. For me, I would become overwhelmed with fear not all the time. So I could be up somewhere doing just fine, and then suddenly I would be paralyzed.
Wow.
So after, 5 or 6 times of doing that and crawling down or whatever I had to do, I learned that if I kept a tape measure with me, I could trick myself. And I would fake measure something. I would just give my brain something else to
man.
do.
That's awesome.
And I would get over it. But it took a little while to get to know that about myself. And it actually took me a while to know, oh, I feel comfortable up here. And then all of a sudden, I didn't.
Wow. I just know right from the get-go it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
So,
There's this, and I want all the listeners to think about this. There's a pathway to right to refusal. It's not you either do the work or you walk away. There's a little path in between, which is like you could go to your employer and say, "Hey, there's a safe. I'm not comfortable. I feel like there's a safer way to do this," and there can be some dialogue between both of you, so that there's a little path to safety, and it's not just A to B. There's a whole bunch of little side roads that will everybody can be a win in that situation.
Yeah, it could even mean a different tool.
Sure.
If you were up on a ladder and you were uncomfortable with the Sawzall because it was jerking you, maybe you tell somebody you're uncomfortable and we'll come up with a different kind of tool that won't make you feel the same
right.
impact.
So, Martin, if I could just, I think, make myself clear on kind of what you're saying is it's not just no, it's, hey, so-and-so, I would really, I don't feel like it's safe right now.
Yeah.
But I think that if we did X, Y, and Z or Z, that it would be, an acceptable, I would feel safe doing it. And that conversation is the important piece of the puzzle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And it's a back and forth.
Yeah.
And if push came to shove,
Yeah, you might need a different job.
well, you got to protect yourself more than,
Yeah. Paychecks are cool.
yeah.
Fingers are cooler.
And life is the coolest.
Life
Right.
is the coolest. Exactly.
Yeah, without a permanent disability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're coming up to the end here, and I actually just realized that we did not introduce ourselves. Who are these people that are talking to our thousands of listeners?
We could be whoever they want us to be.
Oh, interesting.
We might be artificial.
Yeah.
Is this AI or isn't it?
I don't know.
We don't know.
I don't have
It's
the
not.
I part.
But so maybe I'll just introduce myself first, and then whoever wants to go next and last, and then we'll go through that way. So I'm Ryan Mann. I have been at SAIT for 12 years now, currently in a sort of a different sort of role, but we've all taught and all teaching carpentry, 4th year specifically. And I come from a very long time spent in industry doing residential renovations. And so that's where all of my experience lies. I think I spent about 5 minutes on a commercial site and a whole bunch of framing before that. So I don't like being cold in the wintertime. So I very intentionally went renovations, and I could spend time in basements and main floors and, doing all that fun stuff. So
It's fair.
Yeah.
It's fair.
And I really love the idea of the amount of problem solving that goes into putting old to new. And that's such a challenging part of renovations. And so also a very fun part when you start talking about, all of our curriculum that we, talk about, and how some of it's a little outdated. But dealing with 1950s houses, you see all of that stuff. And so it was a really, really cool space to spend my time in. So, take it away, whoever.
Nice. Jane's looking at me again with those eyes burning.
Those burning eyes.
Burning eyes. So my name is Martin Eisbrenner. I entered the trade right out of high school. I was 17-ish, 18 or whatever, and finished off. We were doing residential. I was a residential guy doing finishing. And then once I got my ticket, I had my own company for a couple of years, realized I was a terrible capitalist slash entrepreneur. It just wasn't for me. And so found a nice, comfy government job. I was actually in a maintenance department at a local hospital. And then I decided I wanted to get a degree. So I went to the University of Alberta, got an ed degree.
Nice.
And then I taught in the public system for a couple of years, realized that that wasn't for me either. I always take the hard route through my jobs. I'm like,
Smart.
try that
Me
out.
too.
And then, nah, not so good. So I did that, and then I got into commercial for a couple of years, and I'm glad that I did that now because I have sort of a well-rounded trade background. Got into commercial for a couple of years, and then I got a job at State. And so, counting contract time, I started at State in the fall of 1998. So we're looking at 27 years, including contract time at State.
And you've been here since last century.
Yeah, pre Y2K. Is that what you're
Wow.
getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeepers.
I've melded to this place.
And I had the absolute pleasure of being taught by Martin.
It's
in
true. It
fourth
was a
year.
pleasure for you.
Yeah.
I know.
Jeez. All right. Well, enough of this guy.
Oh, yeah.
I am Jane Durango. I am a newish instructor here. I've been here a few years. I got my ticket here at SAIT before Martin started teaching here at SAIT.
Whoa.
And I was in my middle 20s, maybe even some might say late 20s. I was looking for a job with a pretty good income and trade, and I seemed to like the carpentry part, the outside, being outside
Okay.
part for me.
I liked being outside in the summertime.
So I did all of my apprenticeship with the same company. It was a residential renovation company. And then after John retired, I took on my own company. He basically pushed me out on my own and said, go to it. I don't know if I was good at it, but I did it for 25 years. And,
Nice.
and then I feel like I always wanted to finish my career teaching, giving back to the next group.
Very cool.
And here you are.
And here I am,
Yeah.
working with amazing people.
That's true.
Yeah. 100%. We get to work with amazing people too.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to kind of start to wrap stuff up here, but I want to make sure that everybody knows what comes at the end of this so you don't just press stop and move on to the next one. Every episode is going to finish with a part called the final cut. And so the final cut is actually specific to fourth year curriculum, and it's going to be delivered by either Martin or Jane or both, maybe, who knows, just like 5 minutes, whatever they think is super important for their students. And so it's a little sneak peek into the minds of those two geniuses. Oh, no pressure.
We cannot
No
live
pressure.
up to
What do you want from us now?
Yeah.
What's happening?
You're welcome. You're
Yeah.
welcome. So that's coming up after we close, so don't go away. But we're just going to wrap up with a quick little chit chat. You both have a picture, a printout of a picture of a sign that is by your offices that says, "This caution, this sign has sharp edges." And it just reminds me of how redundant sometimes safety programs and policy and procedure feels. And so, it's really easy to go about our daily business and, thinking stuff's not going to happen to us, or these procedures are a little over the top, like that sign, or, super redundant, like that sign. And so, we walk around, that's not going to happen to me. And so to me, it's just kind of like a little friendly reminder that, we do have these policies and procedures because somebody did make a poor decision or lost focus. And so, redundancies are a good thing. And so it's a good reminder to help us sort of keep safe, even though, some of these things seem ridiculous.
Well, I think with students, well, and myself included, I would think with carpenters, I'm going to say, let's all carpenters get a certain level of comfort with their tools. that doesn't mean they're necessarily safer with those tools.
Right.
And I think I'm going to bring back that focus part, because some of my near misses were because I shifted my focus in the middle of something, the middle of a cut or something like that, the one I'm thinking of. And so when we're reminding students of safety, I feel like often they tune us out because we're the piece of paper that's saying we have sharp edges, right?
Yeah.
We're the one that, of course, it's a table saw, it's going to cut me. Yeah, I get that. But we're not trying to say it the obvious. We're trying to remind you to dial it in before you try and do something dangerous. And that will remind you to make the right decisions every time.
I like that.
Yeah. What do you think, Martin?
I don't know. I was just thinking when you were talking about that, I was thinking about some of the saws that we have that actually stop when you touch them. There's always that debate too about should we have those saws or shouldn't we? Because if we have them, then students will become complacent about safety and they'll stop using push sticks and stuff. I feel like that's not happened.
No.
I feel like they're still using push sticks and push blocks and keeping their hands away from the moving bits.
Yeah.
And I feel like the saw stop is like a kind of redundant and yet helpful. I feel like in our situation, it's a good thing. Maybe our first year classes should have more of those saws in their shop, maybe even second year. I don't know. Third year, maybe.
Not a lot of
Third
table
year?
saw in second year.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it kind of even works for me now. I've got some projects I'm doing right now, and sometimes you can break some rules with tools. But I have to say, I have thought of my students more than once thinking, I better do this properly because I am not going to face a classroom full of students with my arm in a sling.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm not going to show them that trick.
Yeah.
That trick that I do at home, I'm not showing that one.
But I don't want to have the sling on
Yeah.
and then say I did something that I knew
Eating
I shouldn't
crow
do.
is tough.
Yeah.
We still all got all 5? Excellent.
Hand check.
All 5.
Love it.
Let's not count
Or is that 10?
stitches. Let's not count stitches.
Oh, right.
Let's not count
No.
stitches.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning into the Under Construction podcast. We'll see you next week.
Hey, this is the final cut. I want to say one of the things that fourth year students need to focus on is preparation, being ready for shop. Not just shop, of course, all the subjects. But one of the things I like to say to my students is I had this student way back in the day who finished his desk in, 24 hours or whatever. And then he was standing there looking around, wondering what to do next. He thought he had made a mistake or forgotten something. Turned out that, no, he was just super prepared. I watched him as he had moved around the shop. He always had a notepad with him. Anytime he stepped up to a table saw, he'd pull out the notepad, check his numbers, make sure everything was cool, and he would move on. And when those 24 hours were up, which is 2 hours faster than, standard time, he was left wondering, is there something missing? So preparation for all facets of fourth year is what I would say is one of the keys to success in fourth year.